Welcome. May I open today's proceedings by wishing a very good day to all of our participants, located as you are over a wide range of geographies and time zones. My name is Tim Devenport, and I'm Executive Director of the ISNI International Agency. It's my enormous pleasure to welcome you along today to join our inaugural ISNI Information Day and to tell you more about ISNI, the International Standard Name Identifier, its objectives and plans now and into the future. We're aiming to pack in quite a lot of content in a short period of time, so I'm under strict instructions to keep things moving along. To set the scene, I'm really pleased to ask ISNI's chair, Michael Healy, from the Copyright Clearance Centre and the rights organisation IFRRO, to paint us a picture of where ISNI came from and how we see it developing. Michael, may I pass the microphone to you?
Yes, please. That would be great, Tim. Thank you very much. I hope you can hear me okay.
Yes, I hear you well. Thank you.
Good. Well, hello, everybody. As Tim has indicated, my name is Michael Healy. I'm the Executive Director for International Relations at Copyright Clearance Centre, and I'm based in New York. As Chairman of ISNI's International Agency, I want to welcome you all to today's event and to thank you very much for joining us. I know all of you have many, many commitments, so I'm really grateful that you could spend some time with us today. It's a special event for those of us who have been involved in ISNI from the outset, because we're marking, as you probably know, 10 years this year of the ISNI community. Many of the organizations that helped to start ISNI a decade ago, national libraries, industry associations like IFRRO, the one I represent today, rights management bodies, etc., we're still deeply involved in this work. And I want to say how grateful I am to them for their long support of ISNI. Some of those organizations are part of today's program. Today's ISNI community has prospered in ways that the founders hoped would happen. We have a growing base of members all around the world, and those members and registration agencies are the engine of everything we do in the ISNI community. If we could move to the next slide, that would be great. You'll be hearing from some of them today and about how they are applying ISNI to solve problems in a very wide range of use cases. I think one of the most satisfying things about working with ISNI has been to see it adopted in so many different industries. In recent years, for example, it has been implemented very widely in the music sector, and it has been really gratifying to see it helping to solve some of that industry's most pressing challenges. Over the course of the next few months, we're going to see new use cases in areas such as publishing and collective rights management, areas that have faced real challenges around unambiguous identification when it comes to things like making accurate royalty payments, product metadata, and various aspects of supply chain management. As those new use cases come online, we'll be sure to keep everybody informed about those developments. The final thing I want to say before handing back to Tim and to what is, I think, a really excellent program of speakers today is that the ISNI community is one that's very, very deeply engaged in the work. The hundreds of you who have signed up today illustrate that. If you happen to be new to ISNI, I hope very much that you'll get involved with our work after today's event. Of course, all of us are here to help, so please contact us if there's anything you need going forward. With that, let me say once again, thank you again for joining us today. I hope very, very much you enjoy today's program. And back to you, Tim.
Many thanks, Michael. A really useful scene setter, and important for me too, Despite our frequent contacts on ISNI Business, it's always great to have the opportunity to reflect on where we've come from and, more importantly, where we're headed. Now, participants in this event will already have detected that the ISNI standard for name identification is by no means restricted to a single area of endeavour. In recent times, the music industry has shown great interest in the potential of ISNI to help resolve questions of identity and attribution. A few years ago, I had the pleasure of attending a breakout event in Stockholm, hosted by the music standards organisation DDEX. We were already in the presence of musical royalty, with Björn Ulvaeus representing 1/4 of ABBA in attendance, and we met in a very stylish theatre. What stuck in my mind, though, was when I was approached by a very charming and savvy American music industry professional who awarded me, and perhaps others, a medal for services to metadata in music. Never, I fear, was such an award less deserved, but it was very welcome all the same. May I now turn the microphone over to that same music professional, Gebre Waddell.
Hi, everyone. Hopefully we have everything working and that we're all set to go. So I'm going to kick things off first by welcoming you all to the International ISNI Information Day. I'm really happy that we're doing this event, and I'm happy to come to you all virtually to talk a little bit about the work we've done with ISNI and to give you some insight about the traction that's happening in the music industry with this and the state of credits and attribution in music today. So it's going to be a really exciting thing, and I'll kick it off first by showing an overview video that gives you a little bit of insight about our platform. So I'm going to roll that now. Meet the most powerful platform for music credits with a free Creator ID mobile app and plugin, as well as a desktop portal and in-studio kiosks. The music industry is never one size fits all, so we built everything tech has to offer to enter music credits. Enter information once and export everywhere with over 20 exports to a range of destinations and formats. Enter information your way. Take a moment to get all of the pieces, the Creator ID app, the Track Sheet mobile app, as well as the plugin and portal that are combined into a single installer for Windows and Mac OS. This is the way to do credits today. Get Sound Credit, the standard for music credits. So one quick thing, the video that you just saw was from Sound Credit 4, which is the newest version of our platform release that will come out next week. Sound Credit has a long history now, 5 years of being in the marketplace. And with this, we're entering a new era of true maturation with the platform. So I'm going to talk a little bit about one of the items that you saw there, which is the Creator ID card. This is a digital card. There's also a physical version for people to swipe or scan in. This is an option for Sound Credit users. At the bottom here is the spot for the ISNI code. With the digital ID, you see, a picture, the email address, the person's name. You see the QR code that can be scanned. Those items are there. And yes, that ISNI code is at the bottom. And what I'd like to mention about this is that when you get a Creator ID from Sound Credit, you can get it a couple of different ways. You can go through our website and hit sign in and hit get free account, and you will go through the process there, or you can download the Creator ID app in this way. And once you go through that process, which takes about a minute and a half, you will have an ISNI code either retrieved or generated as part of that process. While we were building that, it was the first ever free and fully automated registration system for music industry ISNI codes. And we had a big focus on data quality to preserve the quality and the database there with ISNI, and also ease of use. It has to be streamlined. It has to be something that users can do, and that they can make it through that process and do it simply. Another thing I'll mention about this is that it was built on a microservice. So our system connects with that microservice through the registration flow, but it also could work for anyone else that wanted to use it. So if there's a company out there that didn't want to build all of that bit themselves, they could work with that microservice. It takes a simple JSON payload with a structure that has all the rules and everything built into it, and it returns that code along with a certificate that we generate. While our platform is focused entirely on the music industry, that microservice is industry agnostic. So this is not something we're actually marketing or anything, but if someone was interested about this, especially in this kind of forum, I'd like to mention that we could talk. So I'm going to talk a little bit about the PDF certificate that we generated. So here it is. This is the PDF certificate that is generated when a user completes the creator ID flow. This isn't something that was required by ISNI or anything, but we wanted to find something that would add a little bit of digital pomp and circumstance to the moment of getting their ISNI code. This really officiates that moment so that people understand that they have an ISNI. So with this, everyone in this industry wants to be properly identified, and everyone wants to receive credit where credit is due, and recognizes that things like this it's an artifact that helps them to understand that this view and this movement is happening. So next, I'm going to show a little bit about the rest of the platform. So if you have a creator ID, or if you don't, I want to make clear here that we don't require all SoundCredit users or creators to have a creator ID. If they have one, it helps them to be credited more accurately because they'll have an ISNI code. Their other information can be entered. It makes it simple for people to check them in, but it's not a requirement. You can also just enter credits and information manually. But with this, if you have the creator ID, then you have some other options. You can be checked into the desktop app very simply. You would just hit add participants that's there in the corner, and you would enter the email address of the creator ID, and that would then check the person into SoundCredit very simply and easily. And of course, again, you could also just select the manual entry button and enter that person manually as well. Less fidelity of information, more data entry, but that pathway is also present. With this, it goes beyond the desktop app. There is also the mobile app that people can use to check in. You can just hit the add credit button here, and you can add a credit like the ones that you see here. And with this, after you hit the add credit button, the very first screen is a screen that prompts to enter the creator ID email address, or you can scan someone's, you can scan their QR code here using the phone camera in this way. So those are a couple of options if you are using the mobile app. So that is another option. I'm going to go to this one. You can also use our plugin that works in digital audio workstations. The plugin has the same interface as the mobile app. So that is another option. And you can also check in with our creator kiosks. So with these, simple to walk up. You saw this in the video, the gentleman that just walks up with his phone. You hit add credit, similar to the mobile app. This is running the same software as the mobile app and the plugin. And you can just check right into the session. And it's easier than at the airport, I promise. So that piece is there as well. So this gives you an idea of all the ways that this information can begin to travel. If you get this creator ID, you get your information down, then the world of options in the tech world is open to you for checking in. We've really built everything tech has to offer for collecting credits and having them enter the music industry supply chain. Now that you've seen the truly multimodal creator identification system that is SoundCredit, and all the different options that are there to now enter credits and have things like the ISNI code flow through the process. I'm going to step back a little bit and really focus on ISNI. Today is all about ISNI, so let's go through the registration process a little bit more in depth when you're creating one of the sound credit creator IDs. So if you went to our website, you'll see this button, Sign In, and I'm going to skip around. I have a little video here that'll allow us to go through this quickly. And so we see here the Get Free Account button. So if I click that, that would allow me to advance to the next set of screens. With this, you enter some basic information, you verify your email address and all of this, quick to do. And I'm going to skip a little bit forward. And this is the automated ISNI registration flow. So first you enter some basic information. Some of this comes in from your previously entered info on the form just prior. And the next tab here is search. With this, it will search any similar names. If it's similar at all, then it's going to pop up here. And it will go through to make sure that you're not generating an ISNI for an identity that already has an ISNI code in the ISNI database. So it will pop up, and this it says no ISNIs were found for your name, but if some did pop up, it would have a little button where you could click This Is Me, and you would have to go through all of those, and if none of them matched, then you could click the button that says none of these are me, and then you would be able to proceed. If you did have an entry that already exists and you clicked This Is Me, then it would pull that ISNI code into your creator ID, and this whole section would then be complete. You wouldn't have to actually register for an ISNI. But in this case, let's say no ISNIs were found. Then we're going to go forward to entering prior works. We're going to enter information about substantiating our career with a URL link to some resource that provides career substantiation. And then we have this tab for a related person or organization. Maybe you always play with a certain musician, or maybe you're always associated with a certain record label. You could enter those options there. And if you go through, then your ISNI request would begin to process. And in a few moments, your ISNI code would then be assigned. Once that's done, you would have the PDF for your certificate that you could download, and you would be able to go into your creator ID profile and see all of your information here and add more details if you like. So this is just a quick overview of the ISNI registration flow that is now present with SoundCredit. Before I conclude today, I'm going to tell a little bit of the story behind what brought us to this moment with ISNI and our creation of this ISNI registration system. So I must take it back to the first days of SoundCredit many years ago. When we were first launching the platform, we always knew we wanted to do something with ISNI, because in the deep discovery that we did, and everyone that knows me knows how serious I am about formal discovery, we were hearing so often that the problems surrounding creator disambiguation were tremendous. Everywhere we turned, we knew that this was a problem and we wanted to do something about it. So as we started looking into it further, we heard stories that companies got into this direction of implementing an ISNI registration system, but it didn't work for them. And there were problems with it. And we didn't really know if it was even possible, because nothing like this had existed in the past, and there were those failed efforts. But around 2019, we started looking into this and wanting to make a go of it. And it wasn't, we didn't know what would happen, and it wasn't without risk, but we took the risk. And we invested our time and our development resources into exploring this to see if we could get a system that would work and get free automated music industry registrations for ISNI if we could get it done. And so in July, when we had things working in the test environment pretty well, we didn't know what would happen exactly when we launched it live, but we did. And at that moment, we found out that There were some bugs. There were some bugs on our side. There were some bugs on the API side. There were things to work out, but about 15% in the first few days of the ISNI registrations, were successful. So that held some promise. And with only a few days, we had gotten up to 25%. After a few weeks, we had gotten it up to about 50%. And by October, the vast majority of ISNI codes that were attempted to be registered with sound credit were being done. Those that weren't done in that time automatically, we would do them manually later on. So there were fixes on our side. There were things that changed on the API side to create this more robust platform. And by the end of the year, we had something that started to feel bulletproof. And I must say, thinking back through, I can't think of any failure of an automated ISNI. I haven't seen one of those alerts that we get anytime this year. So it's something that has fully matured, and we have had about almost a year now of time of fully automated ISNIs being registered for thousands of users. So we're very happy about this moment. So today I have really just one thing that I'd like to ask, and that is that for the music industry at the least, that we change our awareness around ISNI. For the music industry, we're long past the days of this being something experimental or in development or on the horizon. ISNI is ready for full-scale adoption. It's ready for your infrastructure investment and for your embrace. And it is time to stop the issues with disambiguation and proprietary codes at scale. It's time for us to leave the past in the past and to streamline our supply chain with ISNI, and for it to be even more well-known than ISRC. So I thank you all, and I'll take any questions that you have now.
Thank you so much, Gebre. Yes, if there are any immediate questions following that excellent presentation, then please do either speak up now or drop them into the chat box, and we'll try to relay them on. I see, for instance, Carol Gordon from BookNet Canada. Hello, Carol. Has put a question in the chat box. Gebre mentioned that the site has a free sign-up. What is the business model to cover the costs associated with assigning ISNIs? And I think Gebre and I can probably handle that together. Gebre, do you want to load off on that? Lead off on that one?
Sure thing. Are you able to hear me, Tim?
Yes, I am. Okay,
perfect. So with this, on recovering the cost specifically for the ISNI generation, we're not really thinking about it in terms of trying to cover that specific cost. With our platform, our business model is around providing the data from sound credit to partners where our information is delivered. So we're more focused on that. We built the ISNI part because we thought that it should be built and it would help our users in a number of ways. And through the deep discovery, as I mentioned in the piece. So with this, we thought of that as more of like an attraction to the platform and value that's provided through the platform that ultimately increases the data quality and makes the data on the other end more valuable for those partners. So that's basically the business model that's there.
I hope, Carol, that answers your question. And I guess the other side of it is that internally within ISNI and between the central ISNI organization and Gebre's sound credit, we charge a very basic internal transactional charge just to cover the costs of maintaining our hardware and allocating the ISNIs, but you don't see that in this case because Gebre is absorbing those charges internally. I've got a couple of questions here. Jesse Hoffman asks, what information does ISNI carry? Is it the name only? The short answer, Jesse, and thanks for the question, is that there's quite a lot of other information as well as the name. I won't attempt a complete list, but there could be other things, for instance, date of birth, date of death, nationality, the role that the name is associated with, the instrument which is played, in the case of the musician. There are all sorts of additional items of metadata. The point probably to notice, though, is that all of these metadata items from ISNI's perspective are really solely held so that we can do our best in terms of disambiguating similar names. It's not an attempt on our part to have an alternate catalogue of artists or anything like that. So it's a set of metadata which is designed to assist us in matching and disambiguation. Amanda asks what happens if an email address changes. In fact, email addresses are not held within ISNI, so that's possibly the simplest answer to that one.
And on the Sound Credit platform, if we do use email address for our accounts, but those can be easily changed. You can log into your account and be able to change your email address.
Thanks, Gebre. Marilyn Cresswell asks, are there related associations that are possible when registering the ISNI through the Sound Credit app, enabling web search results if someone searches by ISNI, or is that data just stored in the platform for now?
It's stored in the platform for the ISNI code specifically, so you wouldn't search the ISNI and find someone on the Sound Credit site, although you could search the ISNI database immediately after registration and be able to find the person and their ISNI code and everything there. But there is a Sound Credit indie database, so that if you enter recordings on Sound Credit, you can upload them to the web to have the credits published to the world. So those are the couple of different pieces for publishing credits, and then also having the ISNI.
Okay, I'm going to close off this part of the session with two things. There's a question from Meta van der Waal saying, do Sound Credit check the quality of the data?
We have.
You, Gebre.
Sure thing. So we do have methods for that, including the request and edit function. If you do publish to the indie database, which we watch and have some functionality around to detect if there is anything that is untoward that's happening on the system. Also, if someone enters something into Sound Credit and it's delivered to partners, then there are other processes that partners put things through to verify data and to make sure that it's correct. So there are a couple of different pieces that are in place to make sure data quality is high. Plus, throughout Sound Credit, as you're entering information, there are checks that happen when you're at the point of entry, also at the point of exporting things, to make sure that data quality and data quality assurance is happening throughout the process.
Okay, I think the final one we'll take at the moment, although there's a possibility we can return to this later. I wanted in turn to pass on a credit, in fact. This is from Tony Brook at Warner Music Group, who says, Gebre, thanks for all that you've done for the music industry to solve so many vexing problems. So yeah, thank you, Tony, for passing that on, and congratulations, Gebre, on receiving it.
Well, I appreciate you all having me today, and Tony, we should chat soon. We'll have to catch up on some things. Good to see you here.
Okay, thank you again, Gebre. I'm going to move things along now, conscious of the time and so on. I mentioned earlier that ISNI adoption is either established or increasing in a number of domains, though I like to think that ISNIs are addressing similar generic challenges more or less wherever they're used. As an example of this breadth of adoption, we'd like you now to transition from the music industry to the very much international world of libraries. ISNI has been well established in the library sphere pretty much from its inception, and libraries now make up the biggest single group of active ISNI practitioners. For the next presentation, I'm delighted to say that we're in the safe and very imaginative hands of Michel Durocher from Harvard University, and also here representing the program for cooperative cataloging. Michelle is a long-standing friend and supporter of ISNI. She's going to tell us today about ISNI's role in library authority management, some of the ways in which you can interact with the ISNI database, as well as plans that ISNI is developing to further help librarians and other users in their work. Michelle, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. Well, I don't think anyone should have to present after Gebre. That was so interesting. But I want to, I hope that you'll actually find many of the themes that I settle on carry forward some of the very points that he made. Perhaps not as elegantly, but I will do my best. So as Tim mentioned, I am here from the library sector. He mentioned as an ISNI representative to the Program for Cooperative Cataloging. Some of you may not know that organization, so I did want to just quickly say it's a volunteer member organization of libraries that are devoted to sharing metadata production, developing library standards and best practices, and increasingly, as one of the newer focus areas, fostering metadata collaborations with communities beyond libraries. And I have to say that's one of my most passionate professional interests, and what I hope may spark some ideas as an ISNI community for any of you on the call today. Okay, I just want to give a quick overview of what I'll be covering. I'd like to talk a little bit about the challenges with library authorities. We are definitely at a crossing. ISNI as a connector between communities, what makes it unique, what makes it different from other identifiers, and then much like Gebre, a kind of call to action. How might we work together? And I want to share just a few ideas of mine about that. So library authorities, for those of you who know, libraries have been in the business of creating unique text strings for given authors, creators, persons and organizations of all kinds that represent content in our collections or have a role in that content. And it's not an easy task in a global environment to always mint a unique text string to identify a distinct person or organization. It's an increasingly challenging mode for libraries given our global context, but just given the vast production of creative and scholarly content that is in our collections. So library systems now no longer are just a library catalog where we had some hope of perhaps bringing names under a single kind of control that we could manage ourselves as librarians. There is no single set of metadata rules in our discovery systems, and often library content is now supplied with metadata, which is a great thing. In fact, we would be drowning in our inability to describe all the content if that were not the case. So just to use my own name as a quick example of some of the conundrums that we face, even just thinking about content from a single creator, but across the different content types that they may produce over their career. So using my name as an example, in a thesis or dissertation, my academic institution would likely have wanted my full name. But how many of us go on to actually publish with every bit of our full name? For journal articles where collaborators and long lists of contributors are often associated, it's quite common to have just initials. Whereas books and other professional works, an author may typically choose a preferred form of name. And often they will be different, as I've shown here. So what makes ISNI unique and is a way to help us bridge this challenge when using name strings? I would like to just go through, as Tim mentioned, some of the background about how the database was created, some of its features, and answer some of the questions that I think are most commonly asked, differentiating ISNI as a database from other rich data sources that are out there, and I'll talk about some of them. So, but are humans involved, and how do you fix things? Can the object represented by an ISNI, a person or an organization, have a role to play in fixing an ISNI or making it richer, in fact, adding information? So talking quickly about the database, sometimes people don't realize that actually the database is an immense aggregation of many large data files from global trusted sources. And as a metadata practitioner, when I go into the database and I can work independently, I can maybe forget that actually this is a machine-produced aggregation, and it will have statements that I can see at the statement level, the data provenance, where that data came from. And that's very useful in trying to disentangle the occasional errors that can creep in from a machine aggregated file. In terms of the varied data sources, I've listed just a few of them, and these are ones that are very central to library collections. But you can start to see all the different roles that in this range of data providers, there would be unique use cases with their ISNI adoption. And I'll talk a bit more about that later. From a library's perspective, especially a global library community, having name forms and representations of names in varied scripts representing the global cultures that would make use of ISNIs. Just taking Anton Chekhov as an example, you can see all the different name forms that have been aggregated from varied data sources that make up ISNI. Colleagues of mine in the metadata community have told me how often it is that they rely on this field of related names. So both related organizations, but also related persons, whether they're collaborators that can help a metadata professional identify the proper ISNI for, let's say, the co-authored work that they may be cataloging, and they see that, oh yes, this is my person. I see that they have co-authored something from with this collaborator in the past, or the person's affiliated with an organization, and in fact, as you see in this example, can actually be linked within the ISNI database with the organizational ISNI, in addition to just having the personal name assigned an ISNI. So this is a very useful tool for stewardship of organization names and how those affiliations may change over time. Turning now to corrections. This is a really interesting and somewhat unique aspect of ISNI. There's a famous yellow box, as it's often referred, in the ISNI search results. And this can be used both by the person to whom the ISNI is assigned to say, oh, here's another bit of data about me, or there's a statement that's not about me, please take that off my ISNI. These entries are amazingly fielded by human beings in the ISNI quality team. These are dedicated metadata professionals at the British Library and the Bibliothèque Nationale de France, increasingly other librarians in the metadata community. You'll also hear later in our program today about a new British Library portal. That's another way to correct information or for people who want to say something about an existing ISNI or get in new ISNI. And as we learned from Gebre today, there are other member specialized platforms for these functions as well. So I'm just so excited to be hearing about these platforms and thinking about how can we knit together these efforts that up to now have been happening in these specialized domains and with dedicated audiences in mind, but could actually be scaled in creative ways. So I'd like to talk a little bit now about some of the other identifiers that you've likely heard about and probably wonder, like, how are these different? So in the traditional library authority realm, the Library of Congress Name Authority file, to which the Program for Cooperative Cataloging is a major contributor, that again is dedicated to unique name strings. It's an authoritative source with a high degree of quality control. VIAF is an aggregation of similar sorts of authority sources, but at a global national library scale, and also includes other sorts of expert domain communities, like the Getty for art and architecture, and other data contributors. But VIAF is not minting unique identifiers. That's not their goal. They are an aggregator of library authority work. And even though they're cluster IDs for the same name that is found across national libraries, the cluster IDs have been used as identifiers. I just wanted to kind of draw the distinction that that isn't the goal of VIAF, and they don't manage their platform for that purpose. So ORCIDs are one that I'm asked about all the time as an academic librarian. ORCIDs are minted as unique identifiers, primarily focused on researchers and scholars, so somewhat more limited audience than the universe of creators covered in ISNI. But the main distinguishing feature here is that it's a self-stewarded ID by the researcher or scholar themselves. ORCIDs are not designed to be searched for and used by others without a person's specific authorization to do so. So for a librarian, ORCID will always be an incomplete source of identifiers for the range of library content that we need to describe. And that's one of the limiting factors with ORCID for use in libraries. Wikidata is on the other end of the spectrum and gaining a lot of traction for use in libraries. Its largest asset, or several assets, are the open nature. It's totally free. Anyone can contribute there. But that has a flip side of the data is less authoritative, much more open to non-expert assertions. But the power of the crowd with Wikidata does make it an incredibly compelling platform to think about how can we collaborate with contributors to Wikidata, but get some of the richness and vetting of other platforms that libraries are used to. And so that's where ISNI comes in and can serve such an integral purpose at bridging all of these different identifier platforms with the specific goal of it being an international standard identifier with that imprimatur and with the quality team curation, the cross-sector contributors, and indeed the welcoming of adding identifiers from other domains and creating these same as relationships within the ISNI database. So I'd like to turn now to a kind of taking ISNI to the next level in our thinking. I'll just very quickly look at an ecosystem view, take a small dive into one example, and then talk about some of the cross-sector collaboration and benefits that I think could come from our thinking creatively about collaboration. So here's just a diagram about the interrelationship of content in our information and creative ecosystem that ISNI helps us describe. We've got institutional repositories, we've got journal articles, data sets, traditional content in books, largely ebooks, although managed in very similar ways to print books, and then open content on the web, independently created content, fan content. It really runs the gamut. And being able to identify those same objects or subjects, creators, authors, is a real challenge in such a varied landscape. And part of this diagram I put here for us to try to think about where are the gaps in our ecosystem that ISNI can help us bridge. So my deep dive, and Gebre can help me talk about this if there are any questions, to think about the music industry's use of ISNI as he's described so well, around rights management, getting credit for one's work, understanding where a collaborator may be either featured in a work versus kind of in the background of another artist's work, but a true fan will want to find those things. Turning to libraries and discovery on the open web, which increasingly librarians are trying to think of kind of in the same pass related to their own work. Library metadata is not trapped in catalogs anymore. We're on the web and we have to think about our work in that broad way. Oops. And then thinking about where users of this content find it and use it in digital form on streaming platforms, and wanting to find things that they do not know yet exists. They've got interests and they want to follow those breadcrumbs. And ISNI helps us do that if we do find the gaps in that ecosystem and plug those holes or bridge those gaps. So turning to some cross-sector collaboration, I think we are very accustomed to amassing the data that we need in our own ISNI use cases and for our own industry purposes. But I would urge us to think about who are our collaborators in our information supply chain or in our creative works supply chain. Who are we not necessarily working with now, but we have some shared goals and shared interests. I did want to put in a plug actually for the ISNI Technical Advisory Committee and a growing number of sector interest groups where some of these solutions or best practices can be shared with each other. As Gebre very powerfully showed, his organization invested time and energy and commitment to making their platform work for their users. What can we learn from each other? What can we not duplicate as full-on effort, but rather build on each other's efforts in ways that do not create any sort of unhealthy competition, but rather just helping each other build this rich network. So to that point, sharing benefits with each other really enriches the user experience to find the content that we are so carefully stewarding in our own domains. And perhaps there are untapped potentials to share those masses of benefit with each other more effectively. So my challenge for everyone here today is to think about who is adjacent to you in your end-to-end industry workflow. Can you find one workflow gap that we can choose to close together if we simply shine a spotlight on it and brainstorm together about how we might put pieces of each of our workflows together and benefit from efforts we've already put in? So I hope that you have ideas, whether you ask them today or whether you think of them later and want to get in touch with a partner, whether it's me or somebody else on the call today that you're inspired by. I look forward to hearing about the other presentations and really thinking about how as an ISNI community can we work together more closely in this next 10 years that we're embarking on. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Michelle, for those words of wisdom. As usual, you've not only sketched a very clear picture, but prompted a whole series of inspirational ideas and challenges to follow up later. I wonder if I could ask whether there are any immediate questions arising from what Michelle has told us. I can hear the cogs whirring as people considered the implications of what you said.
So Michelle and Tim, Yongwan Lee asks whether there's any encouragement for creators, particularly I guess in the text industry, to take an active role in the management of their own ISNI data. Is there a way to encourage that participation of the people whom the ISNIs identify to fix issues in the ISNI database?
I think that's a great question, and I actually think there are other speakers who will be maybe addressing that pretty head on, including yourself, Graham, talking about efforts in the publishing industry. For myself, I have often really focused on publishers with regard to just the text-based industry, and I think there are direct parallels, you know, in music and film and in other industries that are members. Where the platform provider or the organization that is helping that creator bring their ideas to the supply chain, I think that organization has such an important role in helping the creators steward their identity through their marketing efforts, but also through their savvy about the challenges and the needs around what you do need to put out about yourself. We will talk here a little bit more about the British Library platform, where an author-facing interface is provided for corrections. So those are some thoughts I had.
Thank you, Michelle, for that. If I could relay on two questions or remarks from Gail Becquet at the ISSN International Centre. Thanks, Gail, for both of these queries. There were two aspects which arose. One, Gail asks whether the sector interest groups are already functioning. And the short answer to that is yes, some of them are. We already have regular meetings of the music sector interest group for ISNI. The library sector group is also active, although it's at a preliminary planning stage at the moment. It has held various kind of steering group meetings and will be going more widely open later this year, I believe. And the third area, and I think Michelle anticipated that, we'll be speaking a little bit about some of the activities during Graham's presentation about the publishing sector, although at the moment that's a sort of pilot loose association rather than a formal group. So I guess a qualified yes to that. Some of the sectoral interest groups are already functioning. Maybe the other thing to add to that is that if there is significant interest in ISNI in other sectors, for example, in the rights community, then our intention would be to follow the same kind of pattern to make sure that we strengthen links with the users in those communities. I don't know whether we have Laura Cox on the call, but she might be able to say something about outreach into the research sector as well. There have been some very interesting, promising remarks there about getting involved in that community. Yeah, I'm not sure whether Laura is with us at the moment, but we can follow up with more information about this later. The other one from Gail, and then I'd suggest then that we move on. Gail asks about the quality team. Will the music industry set up a specific quality team? I don't know that there are any concrete plans for that at the moment, but as I replied offline to Gail, I would love it if we could engineer some kind of situation whereby we could have more direct support from music industry participants to augment the efforts of the existing quality team, which has come originally, of course, from a fairly library-focused background. I see that Laura is online here. Laura, I don't know whether you can unmute yourself. If not, then we'll handle this later on.
Yeah, could you hear me, Tim?
I can hear you fine, Laura, and maybe if you could say the fewest words about the research sector, thoughts that we've had in terms of consultation groups.
Yeah, we're just in the process of establishing the research sector consultation group, which is going to cover a fairly wide remit of publishers and intermediaries, other identity providers, research administrators from institutions, and all sorts of other people who are involved in the research sector and care about the sort of data that needs to flow alongside research articles and associated content. And so we're going to be inviting people to join the consultation group over the next few weeks and hope to have our first meeting towards the, I think it's the end of September.
That's great, Laura. Thanks very much for that very cogent summary. That's really appreciate that. Okay, I'm going to, with one eye on the clock, and with thanks to the participants that have contributed questions so far, and thank you again, Michelle, for that. I'm going to move things on. Our next two speakers, fortuitously, take us in the direction of ISNI in publishing, where the ISNI identifier can help, not only in attribution, so making sure we're talking about the right author for a particular book, but discovery too, including finding other publications by an author whose work you've previously enjoyed. For our first foray into the world of publishing, I'm very pleased to invite my colleague Graham Bell from the International Standards Organization EDItEUR to the virtual rostrum. Graham will be telling us more about a recent pilot in the UK book industry, supported by the British Library and EDItEUR, and encouraging the use of ISNI identifiers in book publishing workflows, including embedding ISNI in the ONIX descriptive metadata files that are in widespread use within the industry. Graham, over to you. Graham's just queuing up his presentation.
So I'm hoping now that you can all hear me and see my slides. So I want to talk a little bit about the applications of ISNI in the book publishing sector, but first I'll say a few words about EDItEUR itself. EDItEUR is a very small, not-for-profit organisation, membership supported. It acts largely as a trade association, and we're based in London in the United Kingdom. But our membership that supports our work includes organisations from all parts of the world and all parts of the book supply chain. That gives EDItEUR a rather interesting overview of the book supply chain and the work that we do, because it's funded by a very broad range of organisations. Tends to be for the benefit of the book industry as a whole, rather than for the benefit of just publishers or just retailers. What we do is we develop, we support, we promote technical standards for metadata in that book supply chain. That metadata obviously incorporates a certain amount of information about identity, the identity of authors and other contributors. And I should stress that by book, we also mean ebooks, we mean audiobooks, whether they're physical or digital, point of sale material, and any other goods that flow through that same book supply chain. We're best known for developing ONIX, that's the industry standard for exchanging metadata between publishers and intermediaries and retailers, and Thema, a globally useful subject category scheme. As it turns out, EDItEUR also supplies a comprehensive management service to ISNI International Association, and my colleague Tim Devenport works for EDItEUR. So, ISNIs, talking about co-location and disambiguation. What do these really mean? Well, any size of publisher from, let us say, middle size to the very largest are likely to encounter naming issues within their stable of authors and contributors. Once you have more than 200 or 300 authors in your list, then you're going to find one or two of them share names. That is the same name, but actually two different contributors. And no matter how small you are, you're fairly likely to come across the situation where one contributor, a single natural person, actually publishes books under two different identities, whether it's their real name and a pseudonym, or it may be their own personal name and they also write on a corporate basis on behalf of an organization. So we have a certain amount of ambiguity in the industry right from the very off, certainly with medium-sized and larger publishers. Same name, different contributors, or single name, multiple names for one contributor. And yet, this is an industry where knowing who you're dealing with is absolutely critical, because at some point, you hope to pay them some royalties. You've certainly entered into a contract with a contributor, and you need to take care of your author to make sure that the good author is going to stay with you for their next book. Because of these challenges, knowing who you're dealing with, all sizable publishers develop internal systems to co-locate or disambiguate names to make sure they can tell the difference in their IT systems between those two people who share the same name, to make sure that a publisher can recognize within their system that these two different names actually represent the same natural person. And yet, on the right-hand side, what you have is a Google info box for an author called Richard Holmes. I just did a search this morning for Richard Holmes on Google, and this came up as part of the search results. This is, at the top of your screen, photographs of Richard Holmes. There's a small biography of Richard Holmes, and there's nothing wrong with the list of books at the bottom that Richard Holmes wrote, except for this one. And you may not be able to read the title. It's called Falling Upwards by Richard Holmes, but that book is by an entirely different Richard Holmes. And this is because although the publishers concerned have internal systems to disambiguate the two Richard Holmeses, and I should perhaps say they're actually mostly published by the same publishing company, internally, that publisher can tell them apart very easily, but that internal data does not go external. That internal data is not being used by Google or by anybody else. Retailers often try to create author pages. They consolidate books by the same author. So if you are looking for one book, you find that book online, and you may be presented with other books by the same author. This, and I'm not calling out Amazon in any way because this problem happens for everybody. This is Amazon's author page for Richard Holmes this morning. There's his biography, his photograph at the top, and that's one of the many books that he's written. But again, that book, indicated by the pink arrow, and you may also notice that photograph, that's not Richard Holmes. That person in the bottom photographs is different from the one in the photograph top left. There's two Richard Holmeses mixed up, and this author page is a more or less random collection of books by anybody who happens to be called Richard Holmes. In fact, there's several of them. These two Richard Holmes is actually quite hard to tell apart in the metadata because they have exactly the same name. They're both academics. They're both historians. As I said earlier, they're both published by the same publisher largely, at least in the UK, and they were born within a few months of each other. Matching names just isn't a satisfactory way of doing this. And it exposes authors and indeed retailers to a little bit of reputational risk. What happens if you get mixed up as a very reputable author with somebody whose reputation is a little bit more dubious? Those proprietary identifiers that the publisher in question uses extremely well internally, they don't work cross-publisher. And as indicated by Gebre and Michel, you may also want to bridge into other intellectual property sectors too. You may want to say this author is also a musical artist, maybe involved in fine art, or maybe a scholar of some sort. Those proprietary author IDs don't work for that. ISNI, as Michel suggested, is a good solution. But it's a relatively new standard, just a decade old. And standards like ISNI have a problem. New standards like ISNI have a problem. Generally, it's a sort of chicken and egg problem. The publisher says, I'll implement it when there's sufficient demand for the good quality data from retailers. And of course, the retailers say, oh, I'll implement it when there's sufficient amounts of data being supplied by the publisher. It's very difficult to get solutions like ISNI established in the market because everybody's looking at everybody else. So the question becomes one of how do you kickstart the sharing of ISNIs within the data supply chain? We have a very well established data supply chain in the books world. It works generally fairly well. And yes, I know you can always point out problems. But ISNIs are not yet a standard part of that metadata supply chain. How do you kickstart them? Well, back in about 2018 or so, 2017, and here I want to say a great thank you to my colleagues Andrew McEwen, Victoria Morris, and others at the British Library. They did offer a solution for the question of how do we kickstart the use of ISNI. We can very easily incorporate ISNIs into the industry standard metadata. Here's a little chunk of ONIX. It describes the author of a book, Professor Kerry Peach in this case, and there is his ISNI. It's very easy to put the ISNI, as well as the name, of course, into that industry standard metadata. But the publishers are not going to do the work unless it's going to produce good results at the retailer, and vice versa. Oops. So how do we go about kickstarting? Well, create an interest group, first of all. Get together a few publishers, maybe a couple of retailers, and explain the issues, discuss, form a plan. And the British Library was able to say, if we get those publishers who are interested to supply from relatively simple author data, just the names, their own proprietary internal IDs, and the ISBNs of the various books they've written. Very simple data. Grab that from the publishers. use a process that the library has developed to match that data from the publisher to existing library data where ISNIs have already been applied. And once you've got those ISNIs matched to the author IDs, return those ISNIs in bulk to the publishers so that they can include that in their industry standard ONIX metadata that's shared with the resellers. This means that the publishers don't have to do a vast amount of work in advance, and there should be relatively quickly a large critical mass, I suppose, of ISNIs available to the retailers. So I don't want to say too much about the technicalities of the matching because, frankly, there are other people who can explain it better. But on the left, you'll see, if you can read any of the text, and you'll almost certainly have to lean into your screen, there's information coming from the author. There are from the publisher. There are author names, and there is a range of books associated with those author names. That data goes to the library, and the library is able to match that information from the publisher with the existing VIAF and Library of Congress name authority files that Michelle already mentioned. And they can match from there to ISNI. Sometimes those name strings match really well. And the ISNI can be returned, the green line, back to the publisher. If the name strings match well, and of course the books are matched, it gives you a very high confidence in the mapping. Other times the name strings don't match well, which reduces your confidence. But this can come about because the publisher maybe uses a name as it's presented on the book, whereas the library data has an authority-controlled name, which sometimes includes birth dates or disambiguation strings. The publisher may be using Holmes, Richard or Richard Holmes, whereas the library may well be using Holmes, Edward Richard brackets military historian. They don't always match. And of course, there's a significant proportion of authors that just don't have ISNIs yet at all. If you want more details about the matching process, then the URL on screen links to a presentation by Andrew McEwen of the British Library at EDItEUR's International Supply Chain Seminar almost exactly a year ago. So the results, well, the matches come back to the publisher and they say, okay, Richard Holmes, the military historian, has an ISNI. Richard Holmes, the biographer, different person sharing the same name, has a different ISNI. Julian Cope, the author, has an ISNI. But from another sector, Julian Cope, the musician, Gebre would tell you he has an ISNI. And it's the same ISNI because, of course, Julian Cope in this case is the same person. So the results of the program of doing this auto matching, we've had about 20, maybe approaching 25 mid-size and large UK publishers taking part. They've provided their data. I should stress involvement for the publishers here is free of charge, but we can't cope with everybody, and so it's by invitation only. The success in matching the authors' names that came from the publishers to their ISNIs varies, but it varies in the range of 65 to 80% of the names provided. Very high proportion of names are getting matched to their ISNIs with a very high degree of confidence. And that match rate has improved through the life of the project. It's also, quite interestingly, encouraged the publishers to clean up their internal data in a bit of a hurry before submitting it, because they've realized it's going to be valuable to them in terms of getting those ISNIs and being able to use them in the future. The project so far has resulted in around about 200,000 ISNIs being passed back to the publishers. Those publishers can then take those ISNIs and improve their metadata for both existing books and for future books by the same authors. If they do this, it gives the retailers the critical mass they say they need. The project is now sourcing a little bit of data on an experimental basis from a handful of US publishers. This on screen is an example of the sort of data that comes back from the matching process. And there you'll see the publisher has provided the name C.S. Lewis, and the publisher's internal ID, highlighted there in yellow on the left-hand side, is 9927. The matching process was able to link C.S. Lewis via the range of ISBNs that are linked to that name to a VIAF identity, again highlighted in yellow in the middle of the screen, and also then to an ISNI and a Library of Congress name authority file number. So in green, the ISNI, in pink, the NACO number. This is an example of a spreadsheet that goes back to the publisher, and they can then use those numbers in their internal database. It might be worth highlighting that although I just took this screenshot this morning, fairly random from this publisher's data, on this same screen, we have Akira Kurosawa, we have Andrei Tarkovsky, we have Barry Levinson, we have the Marx Brothers, we have Emily Dickinson and Francois Truffaut. All of these represent merchandising opportunities to link their books to other things that they've produced, whether it's films, whether it's music, whether it's poetry. So far, we think with those 200,000 or more ISNIs passed back, and with those ISNIs now becoming apparent in the data that the publishers deliver to the market, the remaining challenges, I'd say, were fourfold. First of all, to build adoption by those data recipients, the wholesalers and the retailers, so that they can correct the errors in their author pages and maybe make more imaginative use of those cross-sectoral links to other types of intellectual property. There's the 1/3 or so of contributors where the ISNI matching hasn't worked. And Emma Rogoz, the British Library, will be telling us a little about how we plan to tackle that. And of course, to tackle the new people in the industry who don't have an ISNI, who are at the outset of their career, and we need to register or assign ISNIs to them upfront, if possible. And then integrate all that new assignment with the pre-publication cataloguing that the libraries. It would be great to be able to use the knowledge gained by the British Library to enable similar kickstarts in other countries. It's one of the reasons the British Library is looking at some US data at the moment. And then to extend the use of ISNIs, not just to people, but also corporations. Within that industry standard metadata, we can use ISNIs to identify the publishing companies themselves. Again, here on screen is an example. This was plucked out of the publisher's real world data this morning. And the 16-digit ISNI in the middle identifies that publishing company. ISNI can be used for people, less obviously, but certainly true. It can also be used for corporations, whether they're corporations who put their name on a book or corporations who publish a book. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Graham, for that lightning overview of a complex but very valuable cooperative pilot. And I think along the way, without prior notice, you managed to answer a question that came in from Gail Becke, which I'm just trying to scroll back to. Basically, Gail was asking whether or not ISNIs can actually be used to identify publishers and their various brands. And there was a similar question, I believe, a little bit later on, also from Brian O'Leary at the ISG along those lines. I think you've just answered it, but maybe if you could reinforce, Graham, that.
Yes, certainly organizations like publishers, but actually any other sort of organization, can also be represented or identified with an ISNI. And those organizational identifiers, there are registration agencies who can specialize in registering organizations.
Thank you, Graham. And just the quickest point that I'm just going to pick up here, also a question which has just jumped down my screen from Nima. Thank you very much, Nima, for the question. This was about whether or not an author has to initiate getting an ISNI, or can a publisher do so on their behalf. Either route is perfectly acceptable. There are self-service, if you'd like to call it that, self-service options of the sort that Emma Rogoz will be speaking a bit later on, or indeed if a publisher wished to apply for one or all of its list of authors, it's very welcome to do so. I think we'll hold other questions for the moment until after the next presentation. As Graham mentioned, I'm also employed by EDItEUR, although my other standards projects tend to be rather squeezed out these days in the nicest possible way by ISNI Business. Nevertheless, we keep the EDItEUR lines open. And this is how I was very pleased recently to make the acquaintance of our next speaker, Yasmina Jraissati. Yasmina was discussing another EDItEUR product, the FEMA subject classification scheme for the global book trade, with my EDItEUR colleague Chris Sainer when the topic of ISNI was raised. And as they do, one thing led to another. And I came to learn about Yasmina's work with the Emirates Literature Foundation to make it easier to discover Arabic works and literature by Arabic-speaking authors. Yasmina, may I invite you to tell us more?
Thank you, first of all, for the kind introductions and for the opportunity to tell you about this, this recent initiative. Without further ado, I'll just get to it. But since this concerns the publishing in the Arab region and answers very specific challenges, I think some background information is required. So just as you can see here, and you can guess, is a map of the world. I just wanted to show how extended and broad what we call the Arab region is. And what we call the Arab region is actually, well, 21 countries from a political standpoint, but more interestingly, from a publishing perspective, is a linguistic territory. So basically, one book being published in Egypt typically will be sold across all 21 countries, so across all the Arab regions. So this is a quite immense territory to cover for a book. We estimate Arabic speakers in the world to be 422 million, this including the diaspora. And this makes of Arabic one of the most 5 spoken languages in the world. So it's a very big potential market for books. But it faces many challenges, and most of them very large. Censorship, one of them. So this prevents books from entering some territories, and this basically discourages publishers to take some risks and invest in books, because if they invest in a book that ends up not entering in a given territory, it's a big financial loss for them. So a lot of self-censorship as well. Huge purchasing power differences across countries. So if a book is published in Lebanon, well, now with the crisis, prices might change, but typically a book in Lebanon is priced, let's say $8, which is a fortune in Egypt. And one of the biggest challenges as well is the absence of distribution channels in the Western sense. So basically, when a publisher publishes a book, there is no known organism that he can turn to with his books to be actually circulated around the region. So typically, the way books circulate in the Arab region is through book fairs. This is an image of the Cairo Book Fair, where publishers once a month will go from a city to a city. So now, after the pandemic, I hope soon book fairs will come back. Every city has its book fair, so one a month typically. And so publishers will physically carry their books. So basically, they will send them ahead of the book fair. They will be present at the book fair, and they will sell the books to readers and booksellers alike who come to the book fair to stock up on books at that time. So once a year, this is when people really stock up on books. The books at the book fair are sold at a discounted price to both readers and booksellers, which can, as you can imagine, is not in the favor of booksellers in the long run. And that's actually one of the problems of the book supply chain in the Arab region. So as you can probably guess, from an organizational perspective, all of this being quite artisanal and very, let's say, paper-driven, you know, this illustration here is just a receipt that is handwritten, but this tells you a lot about how things are being done. Basically how stocks are handled often, and so how books are archived or not archived in some organizations. For example, we know that not all publishers use ISBN, which makes it very difficult to track books and even like know of their existence. So recently, for example, the Arab Association of Publishers conducted a study, a very first study. We are very bad with numbers in the Arab region, unfortunately, so this is a very good start. And the introduction highlights how challenging it was for them to actually gather reliable numbers on titles produced by Arab publishers of their association. So, of course, the leading few are very modern. The Arab Association of Publishers counts some 700 members, but the leading few are like maybe, you know, like 40 maximum. So basically, this just to give you an idea, basically, of the proportion. So I just wanted to show you here a few numbers to give you a sense of the size of the market. Not very large in terms of production of titles, even if we see a net increase throughout the years. So basically in 2019, across the region, some 70,000 titles were produced, with the larger chunk of books being produced in Egypt, Lebanon, and Iraq. But if you compare to France, for example, on the right, you can see that in 2019, in France alone, 810,000 titles were produced. So, of course, there is this very big disproportion here when we think of 422 million speakers of Arabic in the world versus 71, no, sorry, the numbers are wrong, 270 million speakers of French across the world. And on the other hand, 810,000 books in French produced versus 71,000. So just I thought that this chart basically illustrated my point. The problem, of course, is that not enough books are produced. Not to say that many more books are produced, and you know there've been a lot of articles published in France in the past few years regarding maybe the overproduction of books. They said that that's a different problem. But what I wanted to illustrate here is basically the weakness of the industry. There's been also some publications in past years pointing out that Arabs don't read. I don't think these numbers show that. We know, for example, that there's a lot of piracy. Publishers will estimate the loss to 40%. I'm not sure how they estimate it, but I have several anecdotes that kind of, you know, illustrate that point. The idea here is that actually people do read, but they don't necessarily want to pay for it. And also books are difficult to track. The volumes of books are difficult to track. So what this means, I think, is that the industry is weak. The links between writer, publisher, bookseller, reader is weak. And this weakens the book in the long run. And of course, for people like us who are interested in content and in culture, it weakens reading and writers and all of that cultural sphere that we really wish to empower. So information around books and authors travel with difficulty and are not in general available reliably and systematically. And I believe that this is what affects really the industry in the long run. This is bound to affect reading. It affects valorization of writers who seek translations abroad to get recognition. And as an agent, I can testify to this because people constantly come to me because they want to be translated. Before even seeking recognition in their own market, they seek recognition abroad because locally it's very hard to get there. There's no basically platform for them to exist. I mean, of course, I'm exaggerating a bit, but not that much compared to Western standards. So what can we do? I believe that, and I sincerely believe that it all starts with information. Information is key to unlock the situation, and the information is there, but it's on paper, it's on library cards or on the books themselves, not to say in people's memories, and this might be even more difficult to extract. But we need to make this information available to everyone. We desperately need in the Arab region open, reliable, free, systematic, renewed flow of information, and I believe that this is bound to increase awareness, and I hope this is bound to support reading and writing and basically feed back into the publishing industry. So how can we make this information available? I think that the answer for most of us here is obvious, but it's not that obvious for a lot of the stakeholders in the Arab region. the answer is, of course, we have to embrace this digital age and the opportunities it has to offer, and basically compensate for all the challenges, or answer all the challenges that we have in terms of, as I mentioned earlier, censorship and distribution and purchasing power. So we have this very valuable tool, which is, of course, the web, where so much information is available. And like each of us, look to our phones to read the news, to check on latest tweets, to even go to Google to fact check quickly. So it's such a big part of our lives, and yet only 5% of the content on the web is in Arabic. This is a very rough estimate. I see this number since 2013, so I'm sure this must have changed. But I mean, it mustn't. I don't think it really increased that much. So let's just keep this. All of these numbers actually are kind of rough, even if they are sourced. They vary from source to source. But the reason why I wanted to give these numbers nonetheless is because it illustrates how much internet has potential in the Arab region. As I mentioned earlier, 422 million speakers. That's a very large population. 65% of which, for example, in Saudi, are between 50 and 65. So that's typically people who are literate and are in age to basically read and be independently search for information, and are technically aware. There is an internet penetration of 67% compared to 54% global average. That's quite high. And a smartphone penetration of 84% compared to 77% in France, for example. So I think all the ingredients are there to actually use the opportunities that the digital has to offer to solve this problem of the paucity of information on books and content, written and spoken word more generally. But of course, for information online to be useful, it needs to be structured, at least with today's technology. And Arabic websites are very poorly structured in general, and the information ends up being buried down there, and search engines just cannot fetch them because the fields are not tagged properly. A lot of images are there, and publishers are not really aware of this. And for example, most of them won't have a website, and I mean middle to small ones, not large ones. They won't have websites, and they will use Facebook as a platform to basically share information about their books. And of course, this is good for timely events, but Facebook is very bad for archiving information. So if you look for a book that was posted about on Facebook, years ago, good luck finding that information online. So in 2006, this is when I started really thinking about this, and this is when I bumped into Onyx by pure chance. I was lucky to discover Onyx at the time, which was a fascinating revelation. And I started with this project, the Mubtada wa Khabar, or muak.com, and it stands for subject and predicate. The idea here was to offer a bit like Wikipedia does, but with just me and a friend, basically, so a completely personal initiative, but to offer a platform that was completely open, where readers could create a profile, and once they are registered, they can create a book using Onyx fields, so a structured information, which would lead to a unique URL for the title. And at the same time, as he enters the required information, enters the author's name, a unique page per author is created, and then a unique page per publisher is created. So the idea was to basically give visibility to these three main aspects, basically, of the book: the author, the publisher, and the book itself, which is at the heart of the platform. So to the left is a screenshot of the main page, and the different cards that you can see loading are with the book icon, the publisher, with the camera icon, the author, and with the blue automatically generated cover, a book. And then if you click on the author page, you get, for example, to the top right, Paul Auster, a book that was translated into Arabic, with at the bottom all the books that exist on the platform, and at the bottom right, the page of a publisher, which, as you can see at the bottom, has 3 books on the platform. So this was an initiative that also, there's actually users are subscribing. For lack of means, I'm not able to make it live more, but it's still online and people do use it. But I think that this is the way to go. Basically relying on people and igniting their passion to make them basically responsible to share information about books. So I was very happy to be involved earlier, well, actually last year now, with the Emirates Literature Foundation, which is a not-for-profit foundation based in the United Arab Emirates in Dubai specifically, who is behind the Katib Maktoub initiative. So the initiative is very much in line with what I had started years ago, and therefore I was very happy to be able to contribute here. But their focus was more on authors specifically. Their purpose is to increase the visibility of Arab authors online in English and in Arabic by multiplying the number of pages about Arab authors on Wikipedia by tenfold. When they started in October last year, there were only 1,500 pages dedicated to Arab authors online, and they wanted to multiply this number by 10. This actually is a very ambitious project because, as you can imagine, given the numbers that I'm mentioning here, it means that this cannot be done by the only institution. And the project, the vision, is actually to foster a culture of information and to make people realize that they can own it and that they can actually make it available to others, and raising awareness about the critical, vital, really, place of information in our lives in this digital age. And so what they do is that basically through this website, you can create, any user can come in, create a form and add information about an author, because a bit like Graham mentioned earlier, there is a chicken and egg problem here too. The information might be available, but it's not available online. And therefore, people cannot use information to create pages on Wikipedia. So you need to start somewhere. And we thought we'd start by making the information available and also offering trainings to people to teach them how to become Wikipedia editors. And they've offered already dozens of trainings online, and people were actually very interested, and a lot of people did join. So it's very heartwarming to see. Ultimately, when the author is submitted and fact-checked by the team, the author page to the left is populated, and then the author's individual page to the right can be visited, and the information can then be used to create a Wikipedia page. So again, here using the Onyx standards and also the idea of a unique URL per author to increase discoverability. And as you can see here, Sinan Antoun, Iraqi author, has an ISNI number that you can check at the top right. So along these lines, this is when ISNI came in, and Chris Saynor, with whom I've been exchanging for several years about Onyx, is the one who introduced me to Tim and to the idea of ISNI, which I thought was really relevant for this project. Because since we're starting quite early, not to say from scratch, the idea was to basically minimize wasted opportunities. As mentioned earlier and illustrated very eloquently by Graham, the name can be spelled, even in Arabic itself, different ways. We can add middle names or not include them. We can add suffixes or not include them. We can add titles like doctor, for example, or not include them. And so there is a lot of room for ambiguity, especially in transliteration. So if an author is translated into several languages, there are schools, but there are various schools, and so people can transliterate in different ways. So the Emirates Foundation actually became a registration agency with ISNI, and they're now learning the way to become a reliable source of information with the aim to enrich basically the data on Arab authors, and they're aiming for like libraries to join in, publishers for the point is for them to see the interest in sharing the data and enriching it. So I think we're on the right path to a virtuous circle. Reliable, open, quality information flow is, in my opinion, bound to feed the appetite for books and for content. And I think more appetite for books means reading and writers are valorized, which encourages more writing and more reading and should feed back into book and production content. Of course, there are other factors, but this is, I think, a first important cornerstone. So we have a long journey ahead of us, but I'm happy to be part of this community, and I hope together we can make this difference. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Yasmina, for an intriguing glimpse into the world of Arabic publishing, as well as the efforts of the Emirates Literature Foundation to make that view more transparent and available to all. I think that I'm interested as ever, not just in the superficial differences between the publishing industries that Graham and yourself described, but also in the underlying similarities and challenges that you face. Good luck to both. Help spread the word.
Bon, on va la voir là.
Vincent, can I ask you please to mute, if you don't mind? Yeah, good, thank you. I think we can take very few questions at the moment. I think we've probably worked Graham to death already on this. I wonder if I could just take questions at the moment for Yasmina, and then otherwise we'll see whether we can accommodate more questions later in the session. I see that there's a question from Gregor Schwab of the Index Islamicus. Thank you for that, Gregor. And he asks, how systematically is ISNI used in the katermaktub.org database in terms of a percentage? I don't know whether you can speak to that at all, Yasmina, or whether what you would be talking about at the moment would be plans rather than realities as yet.
So exactly, thank you, Tim, for facilitating this answer to me. So the website actually is still currently being developed. The idea is to create an API between the website and the ISNI database to facilitate the ISNI attribution and the ISNI checking process. But yes, we are very far yet from deployment, but I hope close enough compared to where we were a few years ago when we didn't know ISNI existed. So I can't even speak of percentages yet, but we do have interest from libraries who already expressed their interest in sharing with us their databases. But I think it's going to be a long learning process and a steep learning curve, because as I said earlier, there's no culture for numbers, no culture for data around here. And so I don't know yet how aware libraries are regarding the richness of the data that is required. And I know that their data is not that rich. So they will have to learn that to enrich the data. And this is part of the whole purpose of using ISNI to motivate people and show the value basically of data. But so thank you for that question.
Of course. And Yasmina, if you'll allow me, I had one or two quick questions from myself, if I may. One of the things I was going to ask, and you've already touched on it, I think, is whether you could say a few words about the challenges of maintaining complex metadata, not only in 2 languages, but in 2 scripts as well. Possibly an unfair question. I guess the answer starts off with being very organized, but
yeah, being very organized to say the least. This is actually one of the challenges we've had, the script being in Arabic, but for better integration with the ISNI database, the transliteration in English had to be basically assured. And so there were various suggestions. Technically, for example, there was a possibility to automatically transliterate the name, but then you might get an awkward transliteration. And so we went for rather a manual transliteration, and the 2 records would be bound, and in that way, the full record could be communicated to the database. The tools are actually ridiculously primitive, but I was happy to see that also that, you know, although I know Excel can do wonders, and I saw that Graham also used Excel spreadsheets, so that kind of reassured me. But Excel is the go-to tool in this case, where we have lists and lists and fields. We try to clean and to maintain and to fill as much as possible to be able to answer the needs of rich data when it comes to ISNI. But I think the real challenge is people. As I said earlier, the real challenge is the culture. We need people to understand that data is really valuable and is not something you sit on. Very anecdotal. I don't want to take too much of your time. I know I've exceeded. But for example, when I started with Mutada wa Khabar in Lebanon, I was referred by the Vice Minister of Culture to their ISBN database gatekeeper, I want to say, because she refused to share the ISBN data that she had as if it was some, you know, state secret. So, I mean, there's the whole mentality about sharing data and how it's actually good for the whole industry and not just for you know, one individual. And this is something that we still need to instill here, this notion. So we have other challenges even before organizing sheets that I think will be key along the way. Indeed,
yeah. And one final question from me. I know we're running a little bit over at the moment. But Anne van Kamp from the KBR in Belgium asks almost the question I was going to ask for Yasmina. Any plans to add Arab authors to Wikidata? Wikipedia is online text. For data management, Wikidata is more handy. I did suggest. Thank you for this, and I got excited that you brought this up, because the project Khatib Maktoub is in very close collaboration with Wikipedia, and like they're now very closely knit with the Wikipedia community, with the Wiki Foundation.
And so I did suggest, because I was a consultant on this project and I'm no longer officially part of it, but since it's very close to my heart, I'm still in very close communication with the team. And so this will be brought up in time, because I do believe also that Wikidata is key here. So Wikipedia pages are good, of course, for readers and for the end user, so to speak. But in the end, if we really want the data to be connected to more databases and to increase the visibility of these authors, we do need to, I think, to also use Wikidata. So it's in the plans, but I guess we have to go one step at a time.
Of course, I completely understand that. Thanks, Yasmina, that's really kind. I'm going to move on now so that we've got adequate time available. For our final session today, we'll be looking at several areas representing ISNI in action. Both of our speakers are deeply involved in various aspects of the ISNI project. I could say happily representing a very productive entente cordiale between the ISNI teams at the Bibliothèque Nationale de France and the British Library. And both presenters are very high up on my speed dial list when I need someone to explain to me what's really going on within the world of ISNI. Iris Berbain from the BNF will lead off by telling us more about the inclusion of ISNIs in publisher and library workflows, both to enrich the metadata that's so important in driving book sales and to help automate operations such as statutory legal deposit. Iris, may I pass you the baton, please?
Thank you, Tim. Hello, everyone. I'm very pleased to have the opportunity to talk to you today about what BNF is trying to build around ISNI. And well, I thank the organizers for giving me the opportunity to do so. Today, I'm going to give you a quick presentation of one of the actions we are carrying out about ISNIs, that's providing ISNIs to the book supply chain, which now allows us to automate some of our data handling processes. After a brief overview of BNF's investment in ISNI, I will return to these processes more in detail, the results obtained, and the prospects for the coming years. And well, I thank Michelle for her introduction about gaps in identifiers and how to work more closely with our neighbors, and of course Graham for the background of the publishers industry. I think you will need those information. So the BNF is one of the founding members of ISNI and is therefore a member of the board at the International Agency. From 2011, when the database was set up, it became part of the quality team together with the British Library. And finally, in January 14, it became a registration agency on its own, and it is this part of its activity in ISNI that I would like to talk about today. Our objectives in becoming a registration agency were mainly twofold. Firstly, to have ISNIs assigned to the authority data in the general catalogue of the BNF. So the BNF has an authority file, and now you know everything there's to know about, thanks to Michelle. And our aim was to have ISNIs assigned initially to persons only. Our second objective was to make these ISNIs available through all the tools through which BNF disseminates or exposes its data, specific bibliographic products, ISRU, RDF with data.bnf.fr, and so on, whether for other libraries, researchers, or of course, legal deposit stakeholders, particularly the book supply chain. I think some background information is needed to explain the position we have taken. First of all, our data is freely available in open data under a French state license that is close to CC BY, which means that we have to expose our data and to do it for free. One of our issues was also to build a system that would be as automated as possible. For example, today we sent about 3,000 records of persons created or modified per week to the ISNI database. But we wanted to integrate this automation as much as possible into the current cataloging circuits so as not to oppose the two processes. But this automation was absolutely necessary, particularly because of the context of the legal deposit entries. 80,000 printed books arrive at the BNF every year, and this number is not decreasing despite what one might think. Increasingly, these books are no longer accompanied by paper declaration, but by onyx streams declarations, which now represents more than 30% of the book received. These questions arise even more for digitized book and for the legal deposit of digital sound, two sectors for which there is not yet any official law in France requiring legal deposits, but for which BNF has already conducted experiments in partnership with publishers and distributors. This is why, in addition to the dissemination of the ISNI from the BNF data available on the web, we have set up a special service for publishers and distributors of the book supply chain practicing legal deposit by onyx streams since 2017. One of our actions has been to work with CLIL, the French Interprofessional Liaison Committee for Books, to introduce them to ISNI and its possibilities, and to encourage them to include ISNI in the recommendations they issue to the book supply chain. The other part of our actions was relying on the legal deposit extranet tool set up by the BNF to receive streams in Onyx from publisher, to build a specific tool aiming at sending back ISNIs to publishers by the same flow. This tool, which we call ISNI Demande, which we could translate as request an ISNI, is the way we implemented our main role as an ISNI registration agency since 2017. Even if we work with CLIL, a professional committee, we did not envisage a global dissemination of ISNIs to all publishers with this tool, and instead, we chose partnerships with some, particularly those that were big enough to have developed onyx streams at the time, and streams of good data quality. So this is how the ISNI data circuits at the BNF currently work. I've tried to make the circuit as readable as possible, but well, you can imagine that is not that easy. In the circle on the right, you can see the automated operation of AtomPub, the API that allows us to send authority data for the attribution of an ISNI to the ISNI database, and the return protocol for implementing those ISNIs in our records. Every week, we automatically send all the persons records created or modified during the previous week at the BNF and integrate the ISNIs received in the return record. Some records do not receive ISNIs, either for technical reasons or because of data poverty issues, which we will discuss later. On the left-hand side, you can see how ISNI Demande works, retrieving the necessary biographical and bibliographic data from the onyx streams and comparing them with the authority records of the BNF. Either this data corresponds to an existing record with an ISNI in the catalog, in which case we send the ISNI straight back to the publisher, or it feeds into a record or pre-record without an ISNI, which must be validated by a cataloger before it can be sent to the ISNI for attribution and then sent back to the publisher. This way, publishers can retrieve ISNIs for authors for whom they do not have an ISNI yet in their database, and they can obtain ISNIs for new authors. In addition to the computer developments requested and the data matching work, we worked with the publishers on the quality of the data in two main directions. The form of the author's name, so that they send structured data according to the principle of the BNF, but also of ISNI, particularly for pseudonyms and public identities. And the completeness of the author's data. Well, the name is not sufficient to identify a person, and providing data concerning titles, EINs, and date of birth is often necessary to achieve satisfactory results. What we have noticed over the last few years is that the quality of the data in the ONIX streams is increasing and makes this exchange easier than they were at the beginning when we work with the pioneers. Where do we stand now? Have we fulfilled our goals of having ISNIs assigned to our catalog data and to disseminate them? Here are the figures that correspond to the right part of the diagram I just showed you. The rate of coverage of ISNIs in the BNF catalog for persons. The 80% coverage is quite satisfactory, but we continue to work on improving it. And, well, we would like to sense the organization's data the same way we do it for persons, but it's not yet operational. And here are some statistics that show where we are in terms of ISNI dissemination. So, sorry, these are 2019 figures, as last year figures are not quite normal ones. This is what corresponds to the left-hand side of the previous diagram. How many ISNIs are now in the publisher's data that we receive by ONIX streams? What is interesting is that the figures for the number of authors with ISNIs have increased considerably in a few years for Hachette and Interforum, our first partners. Even so, there will always be new authors who do not yet have an ISNI. What is also interesting is that new publishers sending ONIX feeds more recently already have ISNIs in their data, which they have therefore recovered to comply with the best practices defined by CLIL. This shows that they are sensitive to what ISNI can bring to them, and that ISNI is becoming more and more widespread in the data, and not only through the BNF's return system. It is these two numbers that now allow us to take further steps, particularly those of automating the links between bibliographic records and authority records in the presence of ISNI. The process I've shown you is about getting ISNIs, but not yet about using them in the National Library. Now we have enough ISNIs in our data, and the publishers have enough ISNIs in theirs. We have a level of quality that is quite satisfying, so we can automate new workflows. The diagram you see now is independent from the ISNI workflows I showed you earlier. This is the usual workflow for the ONIX data describing books provided by publishers. Today, those data in ONIX will be used to create bibliographic pre-record with only the name of the author or creator in it. And the cataloger at the BNF will have to look for the corresponding authority record and to create manually a link. Soon, if an ISNI is present in the ONIX data, they will be used to create a bibliographic pre-record directly linked to the authority record of the public identity having the same ISNI already in the BNF catalog. At the end, it seems quite simple, but all we did before was needed to do that, hopefully efficiently and with preservation of the data quality. We hope to be able to develop this functionality for books before the end of the year. It's already working for ebooks, but as I said, legal deposit for ebooks is only limited now. We also will be able to implement it soon for the legal deposit for native digital sound recordings, with the same principle of ISNIs present in DDEC streams matching with ISNIs already in the BNF catalog. ISNI has even another role in this process, which is being set up again at an experimental level, but will develop. The distributor IDLE, with which BNF is conducting this partnership, sends the BNF data streams in DDEX containing ISNIs, which make it possible to directly query the Kantar Media author database and to retrieve additional data concerning authors. I will conclude now saying that ISNI is a leverage to enlarge the role of National Bibliographic Agency, as is the BNF, by strengthening its integration within the book supply chain at national level. It helps to provide new facilities to cultural industry. It enlarges the scope of legal deposits by collecting metadata associated to resource and allow to reuse data coming from the publishers within the cataloging processes. BNF's role as a registration agency has thus been enriched by a third function, that of providing cataloging teams with a reliable, internationally recognized and crossover domains identifier, which can serve as an effective tool for quality cataloging from exogenous data in a context of massification. I hope that you found our experiences interesting and encouraging, and well, I thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much, Iris. That's splendid, a very clear exposition of a lot of the good work that the BNF has been doing over recent years in the ISNI field, and also in interacting with the user community in publishing and beyond. I believe for them that we'll be holding questions until after our next speaker. So I noticed that there's one question in at the moment, but I'll hold that over until we have one more speaker. I'd now like to invite to the podium our last, but by no means least speaker today, namely Emma Rogoz of the British Library. Emma combines her work as identifier development and operations manager at the library with numerous ISNI responsibilities. The UK element of the ISNI quality team reports into her, and Emma was also recently appointed as chair of ISNI's Technical Advisory Committee, as was mentioned earlier on by Michelle. Perhaps in an echo of Gebre's presentation earlier today, Emma will, I hope, tell us some more about a successful BL project that culminated earlier this year in the launch of an ISNI portal, a public service for ISNI assignment, discovery, and record enrichment. Emma, can I pass the microphone to you, please?
It's great to be able to talk to everybody today, and thanks very much for the organisers of this session. It's been really interesting listening to some of the other speakers today, and I hope that everybody will enjoy what I have to talk about as well. So what I'd like to talk today about is a little bit of background to the project of our ISNI portal that a number of the speakers today have already mentioned. I want to talk a little bit about what the portal actually does and what users can expect by using it. Also share with you what we do behind the scenes to sort of look after the data and keep an eye on the usage of the portal, and where we are now with the particular project and what we're doing with it. So a little bit of background is that most of you will know that only ISNI registration agencies and ISNI members can register new ISNIs. There's a number of methods that you can use to do that. You can use the API, you can submit CSV files to OCLC, the assignment agency, and there's also an online web interface for individual submissions. All of these methods use ISNI's matching algorithms to help prevent duplication. We want to make sure the database is as good a quality as possible, and we don't want to get duplicate identities on there if we can possibly help it. So those algorithms are really in place to keep that data as safe as we can. And we also have to make sure that we have really rich metadata to get new, unique ISNIs assigned and to help again with disambiguation. At the British Library, previously, up until this year, we were receiving ISNI assignment requests via email. It was all quite a manual process. These would just come in individually. Maybe some small publishers would have a few that they would want to, or some music producers would have a few. So we would do those via email, and we would do those on their behalf. The user could specify the data that they wanted included in those ISNI records, but the actual request was generated by a member of the British Library quality team. We actually felt this wasn't really a satisfactory service for us or for the end user. So we wanted to create something that was a little bit better service for everybody involved. We have also worked in the past with some partners who wanted to do some batch loads of ISNI assignments, and we will actually continue to do that where required in consultation with specific partners. A little bit of background about the ISNI quality team. It's been mentioned by a couple of our speakers today. So this team is comprised of colleagues at the British Library and the Bibliothèque Nationale de France. And we do a number of tasks to help the ISNI International Agency and the Assignment Agency. We help a lot with the quality assurance of the ISNI database, with sampling data, helping new members with their data. We do a lot of documentation about best practice. We help to train new members and new registration agencies and talk to them about what they could do. We deal with end user queries, and we provide support to both the ISNI-IA and the ISNI-AA. I know Michelle mentioned the yellow box earlier, so this is on the ISNI database, and any user that goes onto there can click on this yellow box and suggest new data to be added to records or any suggestions for data that needs to be changed. All of those queries that come through that yellow box come through to the British Library quality team, and we deal with all of those queries, and that can amount to hundreds a month. So of course that can be quite time consuming for my team. Even more importantly, users were wanting to have ownership of their own data and were quite surprised that they couldn't log in and make some of those changes themselves. So we thought that we would really like to provide that service because we think that's really important, that users take ownership of their own data. Alongside all of these things that we were starting to think about, other things happening in the British Library in the fact that we wanted to be able to acquire content from some of the smaller sound producers. And we really need a solution for doing that. We wanted to make sure our collections were reflecting what was being created in the UK and further afield, and wanted something that could end users could use for that. So a digital audio collection project was developed, and this was helped along with funding from the Andrew Mellon Foundation. This involved a portal for the deposit of sound content and also the ISNI portal as well. Our aim was for the ISNI portal to become an end user registration service, but we also wanted to add in the functionality for users to add their own data, which I talked about. So there are three main functions of the portal that we have developed. Users can search for an existing ISNI. They can add data to an existing ISNI, but it's only adding data. We're not allowing anybody to make any changes or any deletions. But there's full functionality within the portal for people to be able to suggest those changes as well, which would be dealt with by the British Library quality team. Users can also register for a new ISNI as well. And the user experience that you get, it's online and it's real time. So as soon as you submit it, you get an answer back straight away with your successful addition of data or successful ISNI registration. I'm actually going to demonstrate adding some data to the portal, but I will do that just after I've gone through my other slides. So for users of the portal, everybody has to be logged in, so we know who's actually using it at any time. So to do any of those functions that I talked about, even for searching, people have to be logged in. It's a very simple registration process. But we do know who is doing what, and we can see behind the scenes on that to see what people are doing. We answer any user queries that come through. There's multiple places within the portal where people can ask for help or to say that they didn't have a successful assignment, and can we please help them with that, if they want to make any changes, if they want to delete any data. So all of that we still deal with as well. We do monitor the activity on the portal on a daily basis and do some sampling for sort of, looking at certain dates, what was going on. And we do have measures in place as well to prevent any malicious use and ways to block users. So how did we start? Well, this development project's been going on for a couple of years, but we had our soft launch earlier this year in February. We introduced the portal to some of our partners for them to try it out first so that we could get some feedback from actual live usage. So for example, we gave it to some of our ISNI colleagues to have a look at, get their feedback from it. Some of our other National Library colleagues that we work with, we said, please have a go, tell us what you think. Can you spot anything that we need to improve, that kind of thing. And the feedback from that was really good. And then we also started to direct user queries there. So anybody that had sent us a query through the yellow box, we started to direct them to say, we've dealt with your query, but in future, if you want to add your own data, you can go to this portal and do that for yourself. And some of the feedback from that was really good. Users were really pleased that they were able to do that. And where are we now? Numbers are increasing month on month. It seems to be really good. It's really popular, especially for the editing function. That's really taken off quite well. We have international usage. We haven't limited it to only the UK. It's being used from many different countries. And we haven't limited it to any particular industry or sector either. We're seeing some different sectors using the portal. We have in the feedback, like I said, on the edit function has been very positive. People have been saying they're really pleased to be able to do that. And we're seeing that in the activity as well. People aren't just doing that once, they're coming back multiple times to make additions to different records. We're also able to by being able to direct users to add their own data, it's freeing up the time of the quality team to be able to help users who've got more complex queries. And that's really, I think, improving our user service there as well. There's also a link from the Sound Voluntary Deposit Portal, which I spoke about, which was part of the same project. So any users of that particular portal, when they're depositing their content onto that, are then directed to say, oh, would you like an ISNI for this as well? And so they can have a direct link through to the ISNI portal and fill in their data there and get an ISNI for their sound content as well. Now, hopefully this will work okay, and I'm going to go over to the portal itself. I'm hoping you can see that okay. So as I've mentioned, we have the 3 different functionalities. You can search the ISNI database, you can register for a new ISNI, and you can add data to an ISNI. I'll just very quickly show you the search. So as you can see at the top here, it tells me what I searched for, which index I used, and how many results I've got. And as with any search results, you can scroll down, move to other pages. We are actually showing our own member view for this ISNI from the ISNI database. So not only are you seeing full records, but we're also showing the provisional records. Provisional records on the ISNI database are where there isn't enough data to make a really confident match. So they go on as provisional and they may have a possible match with others. And these, when other data comes onto the database and data gets added to it, these might become full ones, or they might become a confident match with another one and become merged. But we're showing these so that people can come on and find these. If somebody, for example, went on and said, oh, this is mine, this is my record, this is my data, how do I make it a full record? We can't actually allow people to add to these records, but they can email the ISNI quality team to get some further information about getting that assigned, or they can click on this and it will just automatically generate an email for that. this just very quick search is to demonstrate that not only do we show persons, but we also show organizations, and that is demonstrated by the icons here. And in the interest of time, I will just very quickly show you some additions to a record. So there was only one record with the name Coach Party, so it's gone straight into the record. We can see it's an organization, we can see it's ISNI here. I'm going to expand all the fields, and I can scroll down and see everything about this record. And I can look at the titles of the creative works of this particular band. It's a music band. And I think, oh, there's another one that I want to add to this. So I'll click on add to this record. And then the screen will give me a number of options of things that I can add. I can add other names, I can add other identifiers, related persons. So for example, with a musical group, you might want to add the band members, but this one I actually want to add another title of a work. Click on finished editions. You just have a chance to check that you've got no typos and that you've added in everything you want to. If you've made a mistake or you've wanted to add some more, you could go back, but I think that's okay. So I'm going to send additions, and that is done. And you can very quickly go have another quick search. And you can now see that that title has been added to the record. So that's extremely quick look at that. I won't go through registering a new ISNI, but just to say that it's quite a simple process. The user can always see where they're at in the process. They select whether they want to get an assignment for an individual or for an organization. And depending on which ones of those they select, the next page will give them different options of data fields to fill in. So apologies, that was quite a whistle-stop tour of the ISNI portal, but hopefully that's given you an idea of what you're able to do. And we think it's been really successful, and the feedback that we've had so far has been really positive. Thank you very much for your time.
Thanks very much, Emma. That's excellent, and apologies for unwittingly putting you under even further pressure with time constraints and so on at the end. That was really nice explanation of what you've achieved with the portal. Have you seen knock-on benefits into the work of the quality team as well in any senses? I'm thinking perhaps things that might have necessarily gone via the quality team in the past, but now you have another angle, as it were.
Well, we've had feedback that people are really pleased that they can add their own data. So that's been one great thing. And as I say, it's given us some time to deal with user queries that are a little bit more complex. So I think we'll just gradually see more and more benefits with people getting used to using the portal. The more that we can direct people there, and the more that the word gets out.
Mm-hmm. Exactly. Well, good luck with the further development of that, and yeah, we'll look forward to hearing about it more in future such sessions. Now, I'm very conscious of the time here, and I know how busy everybody is and the other appointments that people have queued up after this. What I'm going to suggest, with regret, is that we'll try to capture all of the outstanding questions. There are a number that have come in via the chat line and separately. And what I'd like it if we could do is to summarize those and get responses back to those of you. I believe that we have emails for each of the participants, and we can then then get back to each of you with some more information, because there are some good questions have been raised. It's just that we lack the time to actually deal with them right now in the depths that they deserve. So I hope you'll understand that. And as I say, note number one for myself has got to be improve my time management in future such events. But what we will do is move to actually capturing all of the chat queries and so on that we've actually had in for subsequent use. I'd like to really pass on grateful thanks to all of the participants today for your questions and inputs. It's really appreciated. We hope from the ISNI standpoint that you found today's session interesting and useful, and do accept my apologies for some of the technical glitches earlier on. We would welcome your feedback very much on this session, because it's all a bit new for us as well. As I've mentioned to some people in the past, I think over recent years we've probably spent significant amounts of time doing things and not sufficient time in actually telling people what we've been doing. So I hope that we've made a little bit of a dent in that, in what we've tried to do today. And your feedback would be very welcome in improving any future such sessions, which we would very much like to establish. I reserve special thanks for today's presenters, who've given us a very good overview, I think, of the various diverse areas in which ISNI has been active, and there are others as well not represented here today. So I really appreciate the time and effort that they've invested in this. I particularly want to pass on thanks to ISNI's communication manager, Elena Marie Bassett, who's been the inspiration and facilitator and driver behind today's event. Elena, thank you so much for this. It wouldn't have been possible without you goading and shepherding us on in this exercise. Much appreciated. As I say, at that point, we'll close today's event. Thank you again for the participation, and we'll be in touch with those various follow-up actions soon. We'll also be passing on details of a recording of this session, which will be posted on our YouTube channels in the near future. And Elena Marie will be in touch with you about that. You can see on the screen some contact details for getting in touch with us in various ways. Otherwise, I'll leave it at that, and wish you an enjoyable and productive remainder of your day. Thank you very much.